The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as Prince Louis walked beside his mother, Princess Catherine. At 5 years old, Louis had already developed a reputation within the royal household for his spirited nature and infectious smile. Today was different, though. Today marked his first official public appearance at the annual Royal Guard ceremony. Catherine held his small hand firmly as they approached the gathering crowd. Hundreds of people had come to witness the traditional changing of the guard, a ceremony that had taken place for centuries. The pageantry, the music, and the precision of the guards never failed to captivate audiences from around the world. Louis wore his best navy blazer, perfectly pressed shorts, and polished shoes that reflected the morning light. His hair had been carefully combed, though a few rebellious strands already showed signs of his active mourning. Despite the formal attire, his eyes sparkled with curiosity and barely contained excitement. The royal guard stood in perfect formation, their red tunics immaculate, and their black bearskin hats adding an imposing height to their already tall frames. Each guard held their position with military precision, faces stern and unmoving. This was their duty, their honor, and their tradition. For over 300 years, the royal guard had protected the monarchy with unwavering dedication and strict adherence to protocol. Captain James Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the Royal Guard, stood at attention near the front of the formation. He had served through multiple royal ceremonies and had never once broken protocol. His record was spotless, his dedication absolute. Today, like every other day, he focused entirely on his duty, aware that hundreds of eyes watched his every move. As the royal family took their designated positions, Louis found himself directly in front of Captain Morrison's section of guards. The young prince looked up at the towering figures in their magnificent uniforms, his mouth slightly open in wonder. These were real soldiers, real protectors of his family, and they stood like statues despite the growing crowd and increasing noise around them. The ceremony began with the familiar sound of military drums echoing across the courtyard. The pipe band started their traditional march, filling the air with stirring music that had accompanied countless royal events throughout history. Officials moved through their practiced routines, each step choreographed and rehearsed to perfection. Louis watched everything with wide eyes, occasionally tugging on his mother's dress to point out something particularly interesting. Catherine smiled and whispered quiet explanations, helping him understand the significance of what they were witnessing. This was his heritage, his family's tradition, and an important part of learning what it meant to be royal. The crowd pressed closer, phones and cameras capturing every moment. Tourism officials had predicted this would be one of the largest crowds of the year, and they appeared to be correct. People from dozens of countries had traveled specifically to witness this ceremony, many hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. During a particularly stirring musical passage, Louis began to move slightly to the rhythm. His small body swayed almost imperceptibly, and his feet tapped quietly against the ground. Catherine noticed and gently placed her hand on his shoulder, a subtle reminder to remain still and proper. But Louis's attention had been captured by something else entirely. He had noticed that Captain Morrison, despite his rigid military bearing, had kind eyes. There was something warm about the guard's expression that drew the young prince's attention. While the captain maintained his professional demeanor, Louis sensed a gentleness beneath the formal exterior. The ceremony continued with speeches from various officials, each praising the dedication and service of the royal guard. Louis listened politely, though his attention frequently wandered to the impressive soldiers standing so perfectly still. He marveled at their ability to remain motionless for such long periods, wondering if they ever got tired or wanted to move. As the morning progressed, the sun climbed higher, and the temperature began to rise. The heavy wool uniforms and tall bearskin hats made the guard's duty even more challenging, yet not one moved from their position. Their training and professionalism were evident in every aspect of their bearing. Captain Morrison felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with public ceremonies. He was acutely aware of the cameras, the crowd, and most importantly, the presence of the royal family. Every guard understood that their behavior reflected not only on themselves, but on the entire institution they served. Louis continued to study the guards with fascination. He noticed small details that adults might miss, the way their buttons caught the light, how their boots were polished to mirror perfection, and the subtle differences in their facial expressions despite their shared stoic demeanor. The young prince's natural curiosity began to overcome his mother's earlier instructions about proper behavior. He found himself leaning forward slightly, trying to get a better look at the intricate details of the guards' uniforms. The gold braiding, the ceremonial swords, and the magnificent plumes in their hats created a visual spectacle that captivated his young imagination. Catherine noticed her son's growing fascination and felt a mixture of pride and gentle concern. She wanted him to appreciate these traditions while also learning the importance of proper protocol during official events. It was a delicate balance between allowing his natural curiosity and maintaining royal decorum. The ceremony was reaching one of its most solemn moments when something unexpected happened. Louis, in his innocent enthusiasm, caught Captain Morrison's eye for just a brief second. In that moment, the 5-year-old prince did something completely spontaneous and heartfelt, something that would challenge centuries of military protocol and create a moment that neither of them would ever forget. The stage was set for an incident that would test the boundaries between duty and humanity, between rigid tradition and the simple gesture of a child. What happened next would ripple through the ranks of the Royal Guard and become a story whispered about in military circles for years to come. The moment arrived without warning. As the ceremonial music swelled and reached a particularly moving crescendo, Prince Louis looked directly at Captain Morrison and did something that caught everyone off guard. The 5-year-old raised his small hand and offered the most sincere, heartfelt wave anyone had ever seen. It wasn't a formal royal wave that he had been taught, but a genuine enthusiastic greeting from one human being to another. Captain Morrison felt his breath catch in his throat. In all his years of service, through countless ceremonies and royal events, he had never been personally acknowledged by a member of the royal family in such a direct, personal way. The wave wasn't directed at the guards as a group. It was specifically for him, from a little boy who had somehow seen past the uniform to the person underneath. For a split second that felt like an eternity, Captain Morrison faced an impossible choice. Military protocol was crystal clear. Guards must remain absolutely motionless during ceremonies, regardless of any external circumstances. Breaking this rule, even for a member of the royal family, could result in serious disciplinary action, possible demotion, or even dismissal from the prestigious Royal Guard. But looking into the innocent, expectant eyes of Prince Louis, Morrison felt something stir within him that had nothing to do with military training. This wasn't just any child. This was a 5-year-old boy who had offered a gesture of pure friendship and recognition. The prince stood there, his small hand still raised, waiting hopefully for some acknowledgement of his greeting. The other guards remained perfectly still, unaware of the silent drama unfolding just a few feet away. The crowd continued to watch the ceremony, cameras capturing every moment of the traditional pageantry. Catherine had noticed her son's wave but hadn't yet realized the significance of what was happening between Louis and the guard. Captain Morrison's mind raced through decades of training and discipline. He thought of his fellow guards, his commanding officers, and the sacred trust placed in the Royal Guard to maintain absolute professionalism. He considered his spotless record, his reputation, and the potential consequences of breaking protocol in such a public setting. Yet something about the moment transcended all of those considerations. This wasn't about rules or regulations. This was about a child who had reached out with genuine warmth and kindness. In that instant, Morrison realized that sometimes humanity trumps protocol, and that the greatest service he could provide might not be rigid adherence to rules, but responding to the innocent gesture of the prince he was sworn to protect. The decision came from his heart rather than his military training. Captain Morrison looked directly into Prince Louis's eyes and did something that surprised even himself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to move his hand. It was subtle, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention, but unmistakable to the young prince who was watching so intently. Captain Morrison returned the wave. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a gentle movement of his hand, barely visible beneath the formal positioning of his rifle, but to Prince Louis it was everything. The little boy's face broke into the most radiant smile anyone had ever seen, an expression of pure joy and delight that his friendly gesture had been acknowledged and returned. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but its impact was immediate and profound. Louis practically bounced with excitement, though he tried to contain himself in deference to his mother's earlier instructions about proper behavior. His happiness was infectious and genuine, the kind of unbridled joy that only children can express. Catherine noticed the change in her son's demeanor immediately. She followed his gaze and saw Captain Morrison, who had already returned to his rigid military posture. Something had clearly passed between them, though she couldn't be certain what it was. The slight flush in the guard's cheeks and the unprecedented brightness in Louis's eyes suggested something significant had occurred. Other guards in the formation began to sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere, though they couldn't identify exactly what had changed. Captain Morrison's breathing had quickened slightly, and there was an almost imperceptible relaxation in his stance that spoke of some internal transformation. Years of training together had made the guards sensitive to even the smallest changes in their colleagues' demeanor. The ceremony continued around them, but for Captain Morrison and Prince Louis, everything had changed. The guard found himself fighting to suppress a smile that threatened to break through his professional composure. The warmth of the prince's gesture had touched something deep within him, reminding him why he had chosen to serve the royal family in the first place. Prince Louis, meanwhile, could barely contain his excitement. He had successfully communicated with one of the impressive guards, and his gesture had been returned with equal warmth. In his 5-year-old mind, he had made a new friend, someone who understood his attempt at connection, despite all the formal rules and ceremonies surrounding them. The implications of what had just happened began to sink in for Captain Morrison. He had broken protocol in front of hundreds of witnesses, with cameras recording every moment. While the gesture had been subtle enough that most people might not have noticed, military superiors were trained to observe such details. His career could be in jeopardy because of a moment of human kindness. Yet as he looked at the continued joy on Prince Louis's face, Morrison found that he couldn't regret his decision. Some things he realized were more important than rules and regulations. The genuine connection between a guard and the prince he was sworn to protect seemed to embody the true spirit of service that lay beneath all the formal protocols. The music reached another crescendo, and the ceremony moved into its next phase. But for everyone who had witnessed the exchange between Prince Louis and Captain Morrison, something fundamental had shifted. A barrier had been crossed, a tradition had been gently challenged, and a moment of pure human connection had occurred in the midst of centuries-old formal ritual. What happened next would determine whether this beautiful moment would remain a cherished memory or become the catalyst for serious consequences that neither the prince nor the guard had anticipated. Word of the exchange between Prince Louis and Captain Morrison began to spread through the ranks even before the ceremony concluded. Guard units were trained to be observant, and several of Morrison's colleagues had caught glimpses of the unprecedented interaction. Whispered conversations began to circulate among the guards who weren't on active duty, creating a buzz of speculation and concern. Sergeant Major Williams, Morrison's direct superior, had been positioned where he could observe the entire formation. His trained eye had caught the subtle movement, the brief break in protocol that could have serious ramifications. Williams was a career military man with 30 years of service, someone who understood both the importance of discipline and the complexities of human nature. As the ceremony continued, Williams found himself in an uncomfortable position. His duty required him to report any breach of protocol, regardless of how minor or well-intentioned it might have been. Yet he had also witnessed the pure joy on Prince Louis's face and the obvious positive impact of Morrison's response. The situation presented a conflict between rigid military procedure and common sense. Prince Louis remained blissfully unaware of the potential consequences of his innocent gesture. He continued to steal glances at Captain Morrison throughout the remainder of the ceremony, each look accompanied by a subtle smile that the guard found increasingly difficult to ignore. The connection they had established seemed to grow stronger rather than fading, creating an ongoing challenge to Morrison's professional composure. Catherine had begun to piece together what had happened between her son and the guard. Her maternal instincts, combined with years of experience reading social situations, helped her understand that some form of communication had occurred. She felt a mixture of pride in Louis's natural warmth and concern about any potential complications his spontaneous, behavior might have caused. The ceremony reached its climactic moment as the guards began their precise drill movements. Every step was choreographed, every turn executed with mathematical precision. The pageantry was magnificent, a display of discipline and coordination that had been perfected over generations. Yet underneath the formal spectacle, tension was building as word of Morrison's protocol breach continued to spread. Captain Morrison found himself in an increasingly difficult position as the ceremony progressed. He was acutely aware that his actions were being scrutinized by superiors and colleagues alike. The knowledge that he had broken protocol weighed heavily on his mind. Yet every time he caught sight of Prince Louis's continued happiness, he felt a renewed sense that he had done the right thing. The young prince, meanwhile, had begun to understand that something special had happened between him and the guard. While he couldn't fully comprehend the significance of military protocol or the potential consequences of breaking it, his intuitive nature told him that Captain Morrison had done something kind and brave by acknowledging his greeting. As the guards moved through their final formations, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, the commanding officer of the unit, made his way discreetly through the crowd to get a better view of the situation. Hayes was known for his strict adherence to military protocol, but he was also recognized as a fair and thoughtful leader who considered all aspects of a situation before making decisions. The ceremony was nearing its conclusion when an unexpected development occurred. Prince William, who had been observing the entire event from a position near his family, began walking toward the guard formation. His movement was subtle and appeared casual, but those who knew him well recognized the purposeful nature of his approach. William had noticed the interaction between his son and Captain Morrison, and his protective paternal instincts had been engaged. However, rather than being concerned about protocol breaches, he found himself impressed by the guard's humanity and his son's natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. The future king saw an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership that balanced tradition with compassion. Captain Morrison noticed the prince's approach and felt his anxiety increase. Direct attention from senior members of the royal family during a ceremony was extremely unusual and could signal either recognition or reprimand. The uncertainty of the situation made it even more challenging to maintain his professional composure. Prince Louis, oblivious to the growing complexity of the situation, continued to watch Captain Morrison with undisguised admiration. In his young mind, the guard had become a hero figure, someone who had responded to friendship with friendship despite all the serious formality surrounding them. The ceremony concluded with the traditional musical fanfare, and the crowd began to applaud enthusiastically. The guards maintained their positions as protocol required, but there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. Something significant had occurred during the ceremony, and everyone involved sensed that the aftermath would be equally important. Sergeant Major Williams approached Lieutenant Colonel Hayes as the crowd began to disperse. The conversation that followed would be crucial in determining how the military hierarchy would respond to Morrison's protocol breach. Williams found himself in the unusual position of potentially advocating for understanding rather than strict disciplinary action. Catherine gently guided Prince Louis toward their departure point, but the young prince kept looking back at Captain Morrison with obvious reluctance to leave. The connection that had been established seemed to have created a lasting impression on both participants, suggesting that this was far more than a momentary interaction. The guards began their formal dismissal procedures, but the usual efficiency was slightly disrupted by the undercurrent of discussion about what had transpired. Morrison's colleagues found themselves divided between concern for their comrade's career and admiration for his human response to the prince's gesture. As the immediate ceremony area began to clear, it became apparent that several important conversations would need to take place. The balance between maintaining military discipline and recognizing the positive aspects of what had occurred would require careful consideration from multiple levels of leadership. The stage was set for a series of discussions and decisions that would determine not only Captain Morrison's fate but also potentially influence how the Royal Guard approached the balance between protocol and humanity and future interactions with the royal family. The innocent gesture of a 5-year-old prince had created ripples that would extend far beyond anyone's initial expectations. The meeting in Lieutenant Colonel Hayes's office was unlike any disciplinary discussion that had ever taken place in the Royal Guard headquarters. Present were Hayes himself, Sergeant Major Williams and Captain Morrison, who stood at attention despite the informal nature of the conversation that was about to unfold. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had spent the previous hour reviewing both military protocols and considering the broader implications of what had occurred during the ceremony. His initial instinct had been to follow standard procedures for protocol violations, but the unique circumstances of the situation demanded a more nuanced approach. Captain Morrison, Hayes began, his tone measured and thoughtful. I understand there was an incident during today's ceremony that requires our attention. Would you care to explain what happened from your perspective? Morrison took a deep breath before responding. He had spent the time since the ceremony preparing for this moment, knowing that his honesty and directness would be crucial to whatever outcome awaited him. Sir, Prince Louis waved at me during the ceremony. It was a genuine, innocent gesture from a 5-year-old child. I made the decision to acknowledge his greeting with a subtle wave in return. You understand that this constitutes a clear breach of protocol? Hayes inquired, though his tone lacked the harsh edge that Morrison had expected. Yes, sir, I do understand that completely, Morrison replied without hesitation. I accept full responsibility for my actions and any consequences that may result from my decision to break protocol. Sergeant Major Williams cleared his throat and requested permission to speak. Sir, if I may offer some additional context to this situation, I observed the entire interaction, and I believe there are factors that merit consideration beyond the simple fact of protocol being broken. Hayes nodded, indicating that Williams should continue. The sergeant major had built a reputation for fairness and wisdom throughout his career, and his perspective would carry significant weight in any decision. The prince's gesture was entirely innocent and heartfelt. Williams continued. Captain Morrison's response was minimal, appropriate, and demonstrated exactly the kind of human judgment we hope our guards possess. The interaction lasted only seconds, did not disrupt the ceremony, and actually seemed to enhance the positive atmosphere of the event. Meanwhile, in another part of Windsor Castle, a very different conversation was taking place. Prince William had requested a private meeting with his father, King Charles, to discuss what he had witnessed during the ceremony. The future king had been deeply impressed by both his son's natural warmth and the guard's thoughtful response. Father, William began, I wanted to speak with you about something that happened during today's ceremony. Louis had an interaction with one of the guards that I believe demonstrates exactly the kind of relationship we should want between our family and those who serve us. King Charles listened intently as William described the exchange between Prince Louis and Captain Morrison. The monarch's reaction was not what William had expected. Rather than concern about protocol, Charles showed genuine interest in the human elements of the story. It sounds like this guard showed excellent judgment, the king observed. The ability to respond appropriately to genuine human connection while maintaining professional standards is exactly what we should expect from our finest soldiers. Back in the Royal Guard headquarters, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was reaching a conclusion that surprised even himself. The more he considered the situation, the more convinced he became that Morrison's actions represented the best aspects of military service rather than a failure of discipline. Captain Morrison, Hayes said finally, I want you to understand something important. Military protocol exists to ensure consistency, reliability, and professionalism in our service. However, the ultimate purpose of that protocol is to enable us to serve the royal family effectively and appropriately. Morrison remained at attention, uncertain where this conversation was leading, but grateful that he was being heard rather than simply punished. In this case, Hayes continued, your response to Prince Louis demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and humanity that makes our service meaningful. You showed respect for a member of the royal family while maintaining the dignity of your position. That is commendable, not punishable. The relief that washed over Morrison was palpable, though he maintained his military bearing. He had prepared himself for serious consequences, and the understanding being shown by his superiors was more than he had dared to hope for. However, Hayes added, we need to ensure that this incident is handled properly moving forward. The last thing we want is for media attention to create problems for either you or the royal family. Sergeant Major Williams nodded in agreement. Sir, I would suggest that we treat this as a learning opportunity for the entire unit. Captain Morrison's handling of the situation can serve as an example of how to balance protocol with appropriate human response. At that moment, an aide knocked on the office door with an urgent message. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes read the communication quickly, and his expression showed surprise followed by what appeared to be pleased satisfaction. "Gentlemen," Hayes announced, "it appears that Prince William has requested a private meeting with Captain Morrison. He specifically asked that the meeting take place this afternoon, and he emphasized that it should be treated as a positive recognition rather than any form of investigation." Morrison felt his knees weaken slightly at this news. A direct meeting with the future king was an honor beyond anything he had ever imagined, but it also added another layer of complexity to an already extraordinary situation. "Captain," Hayes continued, "I want you to understand that this meeting represents an opportunity to demonstrate the same judgment and character that you showed during the ceremony. Prince William clearly recognizes the positive nature of what occurred between you and his son." The three military men spent the next hour preparing for the upcoming meeting, discussing appropriate protocol, and ensuring that Morrison understood the significance of the recognition he was receiving. What had begun as a potential disciplinary issue was evolving into something entirely different and far more positive. As the afternoon approached, word of the meeting began to spread through the Royal Guard headquarters. Morrison's colleagues, who had been concerned about potential consequences for their comrade, began to realize that the situation was developing in an unexpected and encouraging direction. The stage was set for a meeting that would not only resolve the immediate situation but potentially establish new understanding about the balance between military protocol and human connection in service to the royal family. The private meeting room in Windsor Castle felt both intimate and imposing as Captain Morrison was escorted inside. He had changed into his dress uniform, every detail polished to perfection, though his hands trembled slightly from a combination of nerves and anticipation. Never in his 20 years of service had he imagined he would be in such a situation. Prince William entered the room with a warm smile that immediately helped to ease Morrison's anxiety. The future king's approach was relaxed and genuine, far removed from the formal protocols that usually governed interactions between royalty and military personnel. "Captain Morrison," William began, extending his hand in greeting, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I wanted to speak with you personally about what happened during today's ceremony." Morrison shook the prince's hand while maintaining his military bearing. "Your Royal Highness, it is an honor to meet with you, though I must acknowledge that my actions during the ceremony constituted a breach of protocol." William gestured for Morrison to take a seat, an informal gesture that surprised the captain. "Actually, Captain, that's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. From my perspective, what you did was exactly right." The conversation that followed was unlike anything Morrison had expected. Prince William spoke eloquently about the importance of human connection, especially for his children as they grew up in the unique environment of royal life. He explained how Louis's natural warmth and curiosity were qualities he and Catherine wanted to encourage and protect. "My son has always been drawn to people," William explained. "He sees past titles and positions to the human being underneath. When he waved at you today, he was simply being himself. A 5-year-old boy who wanted to connect with someone he found interesting and impressive." Morrison listened intently, beginning to understand that this meeting was not about discipline or consequences, but about something much more significant. The prince was sharing his perspective as a father and future king, offering insights into the royal family's values and priorities. "Your response to Louis's gesture," William continued, "showed exactly the kind of judgment and humanity that we hope for in those who serve our family. You could have ignored him completely, which would have been technically correct but potentially hurtful to a child. Instead, you found a way to acknowledge his greeting while maintaining your professional dignity." The captain felt a surge of gratitude and relief, but also a deeper understanding of the responsibility that came with serving the royal family. This wasn't just about following rules and procedures. It was about understanding the human beings behind the titles and responding appropriately to their needs and personalities. "Sir," Morrison said, "I want you to know that Prince Louis's gesture touched me deeply. In that moment, I saw a child who was reaching out with genuine friendship, and I felt that responding with kindness was more important than rigid adherence to protocol. William nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking I hope for from our guards. The protocols exist to serve a purpose, but they should never become barriers to appropriate human connection. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering topics ranging from the challenges of raising children in the public eye to the evolving nature of royal service in the modern world. Morrison found himself sharing perspectives and insights he had gained through years of observing royal events and ceremonies. As the meeting progressed, Prince William revealed something that surprised Morrison even further. "Captain, I've spoken with my father about today's events. King Charles was quite impressed by your handling of the situation. In fact, he has asked me to extend an invitation for you and Louis to meet again under more informal circumstances." Morrison's surprise was evident. "Your Royal Highness, I'm honored by such consideration, but I want to ensure that any future interaction is appropriate and doesn't create complications for your family or my military service." "Actually," William smiled, "we think it might be beneficial for Louis to have the opportunity to learn more about the Royal Guard and the people who dedicate their lives to protecting our family. He was clearly fascinated by you and your colleagues, and we believe that fostering that interest could be educational for him." The prince went on to explain that the royal family had been discussing ways to help their children develop a deeper appreciation for the various people who supported the monarchy. From staff members to military personnel, there was a desire to ensure that William and Catherine's children understood and respected the dedication of those who served them. "We're not talking about anything that would compromise military protocol or create inappropriate familiarity," William clarified. "Rather, we're thinking about structured opportunities for Louis to learn about service, duty, and the honor that comes with protecting others." Morrison felt overwhelmed by the trust being placed in him. What had begun as a simple moment of human kindness was evolving into something much more significant, an opportunity to play a positive role in the education and development of a future royal. "I would be deeply honored to participate in such an arrangement," Morrison replied. "Serving your family has been the greatest privilege of my career, and the possibility of contributing to Prince Louis's understanding of service and duty would be extraordinary." Prince William stood and again extended his hand to Captain Morrison. "Excellent. We'll work with your commanding officers to arrange something appropriate. I want you to know that today's events have reinforced our confidence in the character and judgment of the Royal Guard." As Morrison prepared to leave the meeting, Prince William added one final comment that would stay with the captain for the rest of his life. "Captain, what you did today reminded us all that behind every uniform, every protocol, and every ceremony, there are human beings with hearts and souls. Thank you for showing my son that kindness and duty can coexist beautifully." The meeting concluded with Morrison feeling not only relief, but a renewed sense of purpose in his service. What had begun as a potential career disaster had transformed into recognition and an opportunity to serve the royal family in an entirely new and meaningful way. As he walked back through the corridors of Windsor Castle, Morrison reflected on the extraordinary turn of events that had resulted from a simple wave between a 5-year-old prince and a career soldier. The impact of that moment was still unfolding, with implications that would extend far beyond anything either of them had imagined. 3 weeks after the ceremony that had changed everything, Captain Morrison found himself in the most unusual assignment of his military career. He stood in the private gardens of Windsor Castle, wearing a modified version of his dress uniform, waiting for Prince Louis to arrive for their first official educational meeting. The arrangement that had been worked out between Prince William and the Royal Guard leadership was unprecedented in its informality and scope. Morrison had been temporarily assigned to serve as a cultural liaison, helping Prince Louis understand the traditions, history, and dedication of the Royal Guard while maintaining appropriate boundaries and respect for both military protocol and royal privacy. Prince Louis bounded into the garden with his characteristic energy, his face lighting up the moment he saw Captain Morrison. The weeks since their first encounter had not diminished the boy's enthusiasm or the connection he felt with the guard who had acknowledged his friendly wave. "Captain Morrison," Louis called out, his excitement barely contained. "Mummy said you're going to tell me about being a soldier." Morrison smiled, still marveling at how natural and comfortable these interactions had become. That's right, Your Royal Highness. I'm here to tell you about the Royal Guard and what it means to serve your family. Catherine watched from a nearby bench, having insisted on being present for these sessions to ensure they remained appropriate and beneficial for her son. She had been impressed by Morrison's professionalism and genuine care for Lewis's education during their planning meetings. Over the following hour, Morrison explained the history of the Royal Guard in terms that a 5-year-old could understand and appreciate. He told stories of brave soldiers throughout history, the importance of protecting people you care about, and the honor that comes with serving something greater than yourself. Louis listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed both his intelligence and his natural curiosity about the world around him. His inquiries ranged from practical matters about uniforms and weapons to deeper questions about why people chose to become soldiers and how they learned to be so brave. "Captain Morrison," Louis asked at one point, "when you're standing so still during ceremonies, do you think about protecting us?" Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. "I think about many things, Prince Louis. I think about the importance of doing my job well, about the honor of serving your family, and yes, about making sure you and your family are safe and protected." The educational sessions continued weekly, each one building on the previous meeting, while maintaining the warmth and connection that had made their initial interaction so special. Morrison found himself developing a genuine affection for the young prince, while Louis clearly treasured these opportunities to learn about military service and duty. Word of these unusual educational arrangements had spread throughout the Royal Guard, creating a sense of pride and renewed purpose among Morrison's colleagues. The fact that their service was being recognized and valued in such a personal way by the royal family had a positive impact on morale throughout the unit. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had been monitoring the situation closely, and he was impressed by how well Morrison had adapted to his new role while maintaining his military professionalism. The captain had found a way to be both educational and entertaining, serious about his duty while remaining approachable and kind. During one particularly memorable session, Louis asked Morrison to teach him how to stand at attention like a real soldier. The sight of the 5-year-old prince attempting military bearing, while Morrison gently corrected his posture, brought smiles to everyone present, including the security personnel who observed from a discreet distance. "Remember, Prince Louis," Morrison instructed with mock seriousness, "a good soldier stands tall, keeps his shoulders back, and always shows respect for those around him." Louis nodded solemnly and adjusted his posture, determined to meet Morrison's standards. The captain's patient instruction and genuine encouragement had created an environment where learning was both fun and meaningful. Catherine found herself moved by the relationship that had developed between her son and Captain Morrison. She saw how the guard's influence was helping Louis understand concepts of service, respect, and duty in ways that formal instruction never could have achieved. The human connection made the lessons real and relevant. As the weeks passed, the arrangement proved beneficial for everyone involved. Louis gained a deeper appreciation for the people who served his family. Morrison discovered a talent for education and mentorship, and the royal family developed an even stronger connection with the Royal Guard. The story of Prince Louis's wave and Captain Morrison's response had become legendary within royal circles, though it was kept private out of respect for both the family and the military personnel involved. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in the most unexpected moments. King Charles, who had been receiving regular reports on the educational sessions, expressed his satisfaction with how the situation had evolved. The monarch appreciated seeing his grandson develop genuine relationships with those who served the crown, understanding that such connections would serve Louis well throughout his life. On the final day of their planned educational series, Prince Louis presented Captain Morrison with a drawing he had made. It showed a tall figure in a red uniform standing next to a much smaller figure, both of them waving. At the bottom, in careful 5-year-old handwriting, Louis had written, "Captain Morrison, my friend." Morrison accepted the drawing with visible emotion, understanding that this simple gesture represented something far more significant than a child's artwork. It symbolized the bridge that had been built between formal protocol and human connection, between duty and friendship. Years later, when Prince Louis would look back on his childhood, He would remember Captain Morrison as one of the people who taught him that strength and kindness could coexist. That service was an honor rather than a burden, and that sometimes the most important connections in life begin with the simplest gestures. The wave that had broken protocol on that sunny morning at Windsor Castle had created ripples that extended far beyond anyone's expectations, ultimately strengthening the bonds between the royal family and those who dedicated their lives to serving them. It became a story that would be told for generations, a reminder that humanity and duty are not opposing forces, but rather complementary aspects of truly meaningful service.